My name is April Camden, and last Sunday my father laughed at me across a table full of relatives when I asked where my car had gone. Your sister needed it more, he said, like I was nothing. But the moment Grandma Dottie placed the keys to her own Mercedes in my hand, everything changed. They thought they had the upper hand. They forgot who built the empire they live in. Before we get into this, I want to know, where are you watching from today? Drop your city or country in the comments. And if you've ever been betrayed by the people who were supposed to protect you, stick around. Because this story, it's just getting started. I knew the moment I pulled into the driveway something was off. The house looked the same, sun-drenched brick, trimmed hedges, but the welcome wasn't there. My sister's car, the silver Audi that used to be mine, was parked smugly out front like it belonged more than I did. Inside, the smell of roasted rosemary chicken and my mom's overly perfumed candles tried to soften the edges, but I felt them sharpen anyway. Everyone was already seated. I had to squeeze in at the end of the long farmhouse table where my name wasn't on a place card. April, sweetheart, Grandma Dottie said warmly from across the table, her pearl earrings catching the light. Why'd you come by bus? Where's the Audi I gave you last Christmas? I froze. Knife poised midair, fork trembling against porcelain. Then came the laugh. My father's laugh, too loud, too smug, too cruel. Because her sister needed a car more, he said, slicing into his chicken like nothing had happened. My sister Brielle smirked into her wine glass. My mother nodded as if this was just logical family math, me silently gripping my napkin beneath the table, trying not to explode. Grandma's eyes narrowed slightly. You gave her car to Brielle, Dad shrugged, taking another bite. She's working full-time now, needed something reliable. April just drives to school. To school, I repeated slowly, voice tight. And to the bakery and to my internship and to run your errands when you text me from the golf course. That landed, brief silence. Then Mom waved her hand like she was brushing away a fly. Let's not make this a thing, April. Your sister's job is in sales. She meets clients. It's more important she makes a good impression. I stared at her. I couldn't breathe. That Audi was mine. Grandma Dottie had handed me the keys herself last year after my graduation, whispering, "Don't let them clip your wings." And now they'd just taken it, without asking. They didn't tell you, Brielle said, feigning surprise. Oh no, I thought you were fine with it. I looked to my father. You didn't even ask me. He reached for the salt like I hadn't spoken. Let's not have a meltdown in front of company. The audacity. And yet I might have swallowed it all again if Grandma hadn't done what she did next. Slowly, she reached into her purse. That same burgundy leather clutch she always brought to Sunday dinners. She pulled out a jingling set of keys. Her hand was steady as she laid them in front of her on the table. Well, if April no longer has a car, she said with perfect calm, she can take mine. The table stilled. You're not serious, my mother said, voice tight. Deadly, Grandma replied, her gaze never leaving mine. Take the Mercedes, dear, it suits you better anyway. I felt it then. The shift. Brielle blinked like she'd been slapped. My father's jaw tightened, his fork dropping with a clatter, and me, I reached across the table and took the keys. Thank you, Grandma, I said, matching her even tone. Then I locked eyes with my father just for a moment and didn't look away. Grandma Dottie didn't speak for a while after we left the house. She just drove, her gloved hands steady on the wheel, jazz humming low from the stereo like a shield around us. I didn't ask where we were going. I was still too shaken to form the question. Kansas skies stretched wide above us. The road unraveled in front of us like it had something to prove. I finally broke the silence. They didn't even tell me, Grandma. He just took the keys. Said if I didn't hand them over, I could pack my things too. I didn't expect my voice to crack on the word things, but it did. She nodded slowly, eyes fixed on the road ahead. That's what I thought. We passed the golden fields I used to run through as a kid, where Dad would lift me onto his shoulders and call me his second pair of eyes. Now I couldn't even get a phone call from him that didn't come with conditions. They said Brielle needed it more, I added bitterly. She always does, Grandma said quietly. I looked at her. Why did you give me the car in the first place? Her lips curled into something between a smile and a grimace. Because I knew they'd never give you anything they couldn't take back. The words sat between us like a stone. I swallowed hard. I didn't ask for this. I've always done what they wanted. Exactly, she replied, glancing sideways at me. And that's why they think they can keep taking. The silence after that was different, charged. Not awkward, but heavy with all the years I had folded myself small to keep the peace. To avoid being called dramatic, or selfish, or ungrateful. But tonight, I'd held those keys in my hand like a line drawn in the sand. For the first time, I hadn't backed down. We turned onto the narrow street where Grandma lived, past the white fence I helped her paint last summer, back when things still made sense. She parked the Mercedes in her driveway and looked over at me with that steady, steel gaze of hers. I want you to stay here tonight. I don't want to intrude. You're not, she cut in, sharp and sure. They may have given you a roof, but they've never given you a home. I blinked fast. The tears came anyway. We didn't unpack much. I carried in my overnight bag and she put the kettle on. There were no big speeches, no long-winded heart-to-hearts. Just a quiet kind of solidarity that only comes from two women who have been dismissed one too many times by the people who were supposed to love them. As we sipped chamomile tea in the living room, the ticking of the old clock filling the space between us, she finally asked, "Tell me how it really happened." And I did. I told her how Dad had cornered me in the garage, fob in hand, and said if I didn't give up the Audi, I was welcome to rethink my place under his roof. How Brielle didn't even pretend to be sorry. How my mother kept saying, "It's just a car, April," like it wasn't tied to everything I'd worked for. How I went to school and work the next day as if nothing had happened. Because I didn't want to cause trouble, I muttered, wiping my eyes. Again, Grandma Dottie leaned forward, her eyes sharp as cut glass. "You caused order, not trouble. You reminded them you exist." I looked at her, startled. "They've spent years trimming your light so Brielle's could shine," she continued. "But I remember the little girl who woke up at 5 to frost cinnamon rolls with me before school, who built business models in colored pencil while her parents toured vineyards on the bakery's dime." I sat there, stunned. "You've given and given, April. Let them call you selfish now. It means they're scared." That night, as I lay on the guest bed surrounded by Grandma's knitted blankets and the scent of lavender and lemon balm, I realized something strange. I didn't miss home. Not the tension. Not the walking on eggshells. Not the way love always had to be earned, and even then only given in scraps. Tomorrow I'd have to go back. Get my things. Face my father's rage, my mother's coldness, Brielle's smirk. But tonight, for the first time in forever, I felt safe. I didn't even get the chance to put the key in the door. It flew open the second I stepped onto the porch, and there stood my father, eyes bloodshot, jaw clenched. He looked like he'd been waiting all night, like a trap wound tight and spring-loaded. "Traitor," he spat. "How dare you humiliate us like that?" I stood perfectly still, the morning sun warming my face, but inside my stomach was ice. "You mean taking the car Grandma offered me?" I replied, my voice calm despite the shaking in my knees. "That's what you're upset about." "Don't play innocent," he growled. "You embarrassed this family in front of everyone." My mother's voice rang out from the hallway. "How could you do this to us, April? Manipulating her like that, what were you thinking?" "I didn't manipulate anyone," I said slowly, forcing myself to breathe. "She saw what happened. She made her own choice." "Of course she did," my sister called from the kitchen, laughter in her voice. "Grandma's always had a soft spot for lost puppies." That one stung. I gripped the car keys in my pocket tighter. "You think this makes you a hero?" Dad sneered, stepping aside just enough to let me in. "You're a disgrace. You don't take family issues and parade them like theater. You handle it behind closed doors." I stepped into the house, every step heavier than the last. The hallway smelled like lemon polish and old resentment. "You didn't handle it behind closed doors when you handed my car keys to Brielle," I said, voice low. He flinched just slightly. "I made a decision for the good of this family." "No," I said. "You made a decision that told me I didn't matter." Silence. Mom stood at the base of the stairs, arms folded like armor. "You're making this bigger than it needs to be. It's just a car, April. You still have a roof over your head. Meals, you're not some poor castaway." "No," I whispered. "I'm just the daughter you only keep around when I'm useful." I turned and walked up the stairs before they could answer. My old bedroom was exactly as I left it, neat, organized, filled with small pieces of a life that never really felt mine. But now it looked smaller somehow, like the walls had moved in during the night, or maybe I'd just outgrown the space entirely. I sank onto the edge of the bed, staring at the framed photo on my nightstand. Me, Brielle, and Dad at the bakery's 10th anniversary party. I remembered the heat that day. How I'd baked 6 hours straight while Brielle networked with guests in a sundress I paid for. I whispered to the empty room, I gave everything to this family. And in return, silence, dismissal, cruel smiles across roast chicken dinners. I reached for the box under my bed. Inside were my college bakery designs, early blueprints, mock logos, ingredient cost lists, all carefully tucked away, forgotten by everyone but me. They never saw me as a builder, just a helper. I heard laughter downstairs, Brielle again. For a moment I pictured walking down there and throwing every blueprint on the table, yelling, "This is what built your kitchen renovations, your cruises, your wine club fees." But what would it matter? They weren't listening. They never had. Instead, I folded the blueprints gently and tucked them into my backpack. When I came back downstairs, my father was still waiting. "You can't take the Merceds and live here," he said flatly. I met his eyes. "Don't worry. I won't be living here much longer," my mother scoffed. "Oh, please, let's see how long you last without handouts." I didn't respond. Just stepped out the door, walked to the Merceds, and locked it behind me like I was sealing off an old chapter. In the rearview mirror, the house stood bright and hollow, a shell, and I was finally starting to feel whole again. I barely slept. Every time my eyes drifted shut, I saw the hallway, my father's glare, my mother's scowl, Brielle's smirk. The house that was supposed to raise me suddenly felt like a cage I'd somehow locked myself inside. By dawn, I was still lying awake on Grandma Dottie's soft guest bed, staring at the ceiling like it held answers. The sky outside was that pale Kansas pink I used to love as a kid. Today it felt muted, like even the sunrise was holding its breath. I heard the kettle whistle. Grandma always woke up early. She said it kept her sharp. I shuffled into the kitchen where she was slicing peaches, her gold bracelets jingling softly. "You didn't sleep," she said without looking up. I sat at the table, wrapping my hands around the warm mug she pushed toward me. "Not really." "Good," she said, placing the peaches into a bowl. "Means your spirit's waking up." That made me laugh, just a small one but real. "Is that what this is, spirit?" She finally looked at me then, eyes bright and fierce. "Oh, sweetheart. This is the moment you stop surviving and start choosing." I swallowed, the lump rising in my throat. "I don't feel strong." "You don't have to feel strong to be strong." The room felt lighter for a moment, like her words cracked something open inside me. I followed her into the living room where morning sunlight streamed over the shelves. Her old bakery awards, Best Regional Cinnamon Roll, Kansas Rising Entrepreneurs, Midwest Women in Business, glowed like little gold soldiers. I reached out and touched one. I remember helping with the anniversary cake. I must have been 10. 9, she corrected. "You piped every border on that cake like you were sketching the blueprint of your future." A faint ache tightened in my chest. "I loved that summer." "I know." She walked closer, voice softening. "And while you and I were sweating in the bakery kitchen, where were your parents?" I didn't want to say it, but I did. "Cabo," I whispered. "They were in Cabo. Paid for by bakery profits," she added. That old pain, familiar, bitter, rose in me like steam. "That wasn't the only summer," I admitted. "You know how many vacations they took with bakery money while I picked up extra shifts so you didn't have to hire temp help?" Her hand settled on my shoulder. "I know, April. I saw every sacrifice you made." I stared down at the floor. "They'll never see it." "Then stop trying to make them." The words hit me like a soft, steady thunderclap. She walked toward her desk, rifled through a drawer, and pulled out a neatly folded paper. "I was waiting until you said out loud that you were done begging them to love you." I blinked. "What is that?" "A lease agreement." I froze. "For an apartment," she said. "A nice one, walking distance from the bakery." My breath caught. "Grandma, what?" "I rented it for you this morning." Her voice was firm, unbreakable. "You're not going back to that house, not with those wolves." She handed me the paper. My name printed across the top. Tears blurred the words immediately. "I can't let you do this," I whispered. "Yes," she said, cupping my cheek. "You can, and you will. You've earned your independence 10 times over." I sank into her arms, all the fear and humiliation and exhaustion pouring out of me in one long, shaky breath. She held me the way no one else ever had, steady, warm, a wall against the wind. Then, like the universe wanted to ruin the moment, we heard it. Loud laughter. From outside, we stepped to the window together. Through the blinds, I saw my mother and father getting into their SUV in our driveway, my father doubled over laughing, my mother covering her mouth, clearly amused by something I'd never find funny. I felt my jaw clench. "They don't even care," I whispered. "They're not even pretending." Grandma placed her hand over mine. "Good, let them laugh." I looked at her sharply. "Because you're done dancing for their approval," she said. "And from today on, they laugh from a distance." Something inside me shifted. I didn't know what to call it. Resolve, maybe, or finally waking up. I folded the lease in half and slid it into my bag. "I'm ready," she smiled. "Good, let's go build a life that's actually yours." And for the first time in days, maybe years, I smiled all the way to my bones. The first box I packed held bakery blueprints. Not clothes, not keepsakes. Just pages and sketches from a version of me that had once believed hard work would earn love. I didn't cry, not this time. I slid them gently into a cardboard box marked personal, like I was preserving something holy. Outside my bedroom, the hallway creaked. My father leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed. He wasn't shouting now. That was almost worse. "Well, well," he drawled. "She's finally moving out, miracle." I didn't answer. Just kept folding clothes, each item a small act of detachment. "Let's see how long you last without handouts," he added, his voice low and cruel. I paused, running a hand over the sleeve of a blouse I bought during my college internship. It still smelled faintly of cinnamon and ambition. "I'm not the one living off bakery money," I said without looking up. His posture shifted, just a flicker, but it was enough. "You're sounding a lot like your grandmother these days," he said, like it was a threat. "Then maybe I'm finally on the right track." From the kitchen came a sharp laugh, my sister's. I heard her clinking her spoon in a mug and knew exactly which one. The ceramic one with a little painted croissant that I'd bought her last Christmas. She hadn't even asked. My mother passed by the door, gave me a glance like I was an inconvenience blocking the hallway. I kept packing, memories, photos. The journal I wrote bakery ideas in back when I thought the business would one day be mine. I didn't know yet if I could still want it, but I couldn't leave it behind either. I heard Dad sigh, irritated that I hadn't responded to his provocations. "You'll be back," he said and walked away. I smiled, small, hollow. The kind you make when the worst part of a nightmare is realizing you've lived in it too long to notice. I carried the first box down to Grandma's Merced's and returned for the next. Nobody offered to help. Not my father, not my mother. Not Brielle, who peeked around the corner like I was entertainment. "You know," she called out casually, "this is exactly the kind of dramatic exit you used to roll your eyes at." I turned to face her. "Yeah," I said. "And you know what I finally realized? You only ever laugh because you never thought I'd leave." Her smile faltered. I walked past her, holding the second box tight, each step its own quiet rebellion. At the door, I paused. I wanted to say something final. Something that would land like a stone in the stillness. But there was nothing left to say that wouldn't give them more pieces of me. So I whispered to the empty room, "Thank you for teaching me how not to love." Then I left. I loaded the final box into the Merced's, hands trembling not from sadness, but from weight. The weight of closing a chapter no one else thought I'd dare walk away from. Grandma waited at the curb, leaning against the mailbox like a soldier watching a war finally end. I handed her the last of my things. She didn't say anything. She didn't need to. As we drove away, I didn't look back. Not at the house, not at the people inside it, not even once. It took exactly 4 days for the first crack to appear. Grandma and I were sipping lemon tea in her sun-drenched kitchen when I heard the mailbox snap open and shut. She didn't even flinch. Just slid a fresh lemon wedge into her cup and said, "I stopped paying their bills this week." I blinked. "What?" She took a slow sip. "Electricity, water, internet, all in my name, sweetheart, always has been. Your grandfather set it up that way when the business took off, said they couldn't be trusted to manage it." I stared at her. "So when you say their house, I mean my house." Her smile didn't reach her eyes, which they forgot a long time ago. The front door flew open 20 minutes later. I didn't even have to peek through the peephole. I knew the sound of their footsteps, the rhythm of entitlement. Dad entered first, his cheeks flushed from either rage or the heat. Mom trailed close behind, clutching an envelope. Brielle, of course, stayed in the car. "You," Dad barked, eyes locked on me, "you need to make this right." I didn't move from my place at the kitchen island. "Make what right?" "The power was shut off this morning," Mom snapped. "The water, too. We opened the mailbox and found this." She slapped the bill on the table like it was a death notice. I looked at it calmly. "Looks like an overdue statement from Grandma's account." "You told her to cut us off," Dad growled. Grandma stepped into the kitchen from the hallway then, her heels tapping softly on the tile. "No," she said. "I made that decision all by myself." "You can't do that," Mom hissed. "We've lived there for 20 years." "And for 20 years," Grandma said, voice like glass, "I've paid the price for your delusions." Dad scoffed. "Oh, come on, you're not going to act like we haven't earned that house." "I managed the books for the bakery." "You cooked the numbers," Grandma cut in, "and you skimmed." That shut him up. She turned to me. "April, would you like to tell them where you're living now?" I folded the paper I'd been reading, a lease agreement from the apartment complex down the street. 1 bedroom, top floor, lease signed, rent paid, all thanks to Grandma. My mother's lips pressed into a tight line. "You're not seriously going to let her manipulate you like this?" "Funny," I said quietly. "I was about to say the same thing to you." Dad jabbed a finger toward me. "You've always been too sensitive, too soft, everything we gave you." "You gave me nothing," I said. "You took, you demanded, you guilt-tripped and twisted and called it love." The words spilled out before I could stop them. "I spent my childhood baking while you were poolside in Spain. I cleaned ovens, managed inventory, handled customer complaints. You took every bonus and vacationed while I worked weekends in that bakery." Dad's face reddened. "Watch your tone, young lady." "Or what?" I asked, standing. "You'll cut me off again, give away something else that's mine." Silence. Then, slowly, my mother turned to Grandma. "This is your fault, you've poisoned her." Grandma let out a low, dark laugh. "No, dear, I just finally gave her the space to hear herself." They didn't like that. They left in a storm of slammed doors and bitter muttering. But they didn't leave with anything more than they came with. And I sat back down at that kitchen island, heart pounding but hands steady. They were unraveling. And for the first time in my life, I wasn't. I thought that after the bills stopped, they'd retreat. But people like my parents don't step back. They circle, they manipulate, they plot. So when Grandma called me into her lawyer's office a week later, I braced for another battle. What I didn't expect was the truth. We sat in a tidy office that smelled faintly of lemon polish and expensive paper. Grandma wore her best navy slacks and a silk scarf like armor. I clutched my tote bag like it held more than papers, like it held my spine. Mr. Hadley, her longtime attorney, adjusted his glasses and looked at me kindly. "April, I want to walk you through something your grandmother's been meaning to discuss with you for a while." I nodded cautiously. "Okay." He slid a document across the table. At the top, property deed 212 Ridgecrest Lane. My parents' house. My childhood home. I blinked. "What is this?" Grandma folded her hands. "It's mine, sweetheart, has been since your grandfather passed. They've lived in it, yes, but they've never owned it." My heart thudded. "No mortgage, no transfer, just occupancy," Mr. Hadley added. "Your grandmother paid the taxes and utilities all these years. And now," Grandma said calmly, "I'm transferring ownership to you." The air left the room. I stared at the document like it might vanish. "To me. You were always the only one who respected what we built," she said. "And I want you to have a fresh start, not just in your apartment, but in this family." I don't even know what to say. "Say you'll sign," she smiled softly. "Say you'll take what they never appreciated and turn it into something good." I looked at the paper again. The ink, the signatures, the legal permanence of it all, and I signed. I walked out of that office with shaking hands and the deed to the house where I'd grown up, but never felt safe. It wasn't mine as a comfort. It was mine as a correction. That night, I lay on my new mattress in my tiny new apartment, staring at the ceiling, wondering what my parents would say. Would they rage? Would they deny? Would they even understand how far they'd pushed me? Turns out, I didn't have to wait long to find out. The next morning, I woke to a voicemail from my mom. Her voice trembled, not with emotion, but with disbelief. "April, We got something in the mail from a real estate attorney, some kind of deed reassignment. Is this your idea of a joke? You're not seriously trying to take the house. Call me immediately." I didn't call back. Instead, I waited. 2 days later, the storm arrived at my doorstep. They showed up in the lobby of my apartment building like a tidal wave of entitlement. Dad banging on the glass door. Mom holding a crumpled envelope. Brielle stayed in the car again. I didn't go down. I watched from the window as the building manager spoke to them, arms folded. After a while, they left, hands waving in exasperation. That evening, Grandma called. They know, and they're scrambling. I'm guessing it didn't go over well. "Oh no," she chuckled. "Your father threatened legal action. I told him to read the title line again." I sat on the edge of my bed, the weight of what I now owned pressing against my ribs. What do I do with it? "You don't owe them anything," she said firmly. "But you do owe yourself peace. You decide." I looked around my tiny apartment. The soft lamplight, the potted herb garden on the windowsill, the lease I'd proudly signed with my own name and savings. "I think I'll hold on to it for a while," I said slowly. "Let it remind me how far I've come. That's my girl." For once, I didn't feel like the helper, the background daughter, the expendable one. For once, I was the one with the pen, the paper, and the power. I should have known peace was temporary, that the calm after reclaiming my voice, my space, even my childhood home, was just the eye of the storm. Because exactly 1 week after the deed was signed, a manila envelope arrived, hand-delivered, no return address. I opened it slowly, heart thudding. Inside, a court summons. My parents were suing my grandmother. The words blurred as I read. Petition to reverse fraudulent property transfer on grounds of coercion and diminished mental capacity. My breath caught. I read it again, and again, until the ink burned into my mind. They were calling her mentally unstable. After everything she'd built, everything she'd held together through years of their laziness and manipulation, they were trying to strip her of dignity now, too. My phone rang seconds later. Grandma's name lit up the screen. "April," she said before I could speak, her voice tight but clear. "You got it, too. They're saying you weren't of sound mind." She laughed, sharp and bitter. "Oh, I was never more sound than the day I gave you what you'd earned." My stomach twisted. "They're dragging you into court over this." "They're dragging us," she corrected. "The suit names me for coercion and you as a co-beneficiary under suspicious influence." A pause. "They're going to ask you to testify against me." I gripped the phone tighter. "I won't. Ever." "I know that," she said softly, "but they're counting on fear and your love for me." The line went quiet for a moment, and then she added, "They've done the math, April. If they can convince the judge that I wasn't thinking clearly, they'll undo everything." "They won't," I said, but my voice didn't feel steady, because I knew what my family was capable of, and apparently they weren't done yet. The next week was a blur of legal meetings, tense emails, and cold coffee. Grandma's attorney was a calm, steady man who assured us their claim had no basis. But I'd learned the hard way. Truth didn't always win on its own. It needed to be fought for. The day of the preliminary hearing, I wore a navy blazer I hadn't touched since college interviews. My hands trembled as I buttoned it. At the courthouse, I saw them immediately. My parents stood together at the end of the hallway. My mother in pearls, looking like a woman grieving a daughter she'd never really known. My father stiff-backed, jaw tight. Brielle stood beside them holding a to-go coffee like this was just another errand. They saw me, said nothing. But as I turned toward the courtroom door, Brielle followed. "April," she said, just loud enough for me to hear. I paused, every cell in my body screaming to ignore her. But I didn't. I turned slowly. "What?" She took one step closer, her heels echoing. Her eyes scanned my blazer, my makeup, the tight bun at the back of my neck. And then she leaned in, voice low. "You know you're just a placeholder, right?" she whispered. "Dad always said so." The words sliced through me like glass. She smiled like she'd won something, and walked away. I stood frozen. Not from the insult, but from the truth I'd never wanted to admit. I had spent my entire life performing loyalty for a family that saw me as temporary, conditional, useful but never loved. And now they were willing to drag me and the only woman who ever truly believed in me through a courtroom just to prove they still held the strings. That's when something hardened inside me. Not rage, not fear, but resolve. Let them throw every lie they had. Let them whisper every cruel thing they thought behind polished courtroom doors, because now I had truth. And for once in my life, I wasn't afraid to use it. The courtroom was colder than I expected. Not physically, just sterile. Like a place designed to strip everything down to facts and paperwork, as if emotion had no place here. But our story wasn't just a list of transactions and timelines. It was a lifetime of power games, unspoken debts, and quiet betrayals. And today, it was all going on the record. Grandma Dottie sat beside me at the long, polished table, dressed in her pale blue suit, hair pulled back, eyes calm as glass. My parents sat across from us with their attorney, an eager-looking man with slicked-back hair and a voice like sandpaper. They barely looked at me. Brielle didn't come. The judge, a sharp-eyed woman with salt and pepper curls, called the room to order. The hearing was formal but not a full trial yet. More like a test. Is this case built on truth or just spite? Their lawyer went first. He painted Grandma as a confused woman, manipulated by her emotionally vulnerable granddaughter into handing over property she didn't understand. He talked about declining faculties, emotional coercion, undue influence. I felt like I was watching someone rewrite our lives in real time, like he was putting makeup on cruelty and calling it care. Then it was our turn. Grandma didn't even flinch as her lawyer stood and calmly slid a stack of documents onto the judge's bench. Receipts, financial records, email chains, her annual evaluations from her accountant, all showing not just clarity of thought but strategic control. She had planned the transfer months in advance, consulted legal and financial advisors, left a paper trail like a breadcrumb map for this exact day. The judge skimmed the documents slowly, her brow furrowed once, then rose. "And your granddaughter?" the judge asked. "Was she aware of this before the decision?" Grandma looked her square in the eye. "Not until the papers were signed." That landed. I was called next. As I stood, my knees barely held, but I kept my chin high. I told the truth about the bakery, about the years I worked while my parents traveled, about the car being taken, the threats, the years of being useful but never valued. I didn't cry. I didn't raise my voice. I just told the truth and let the silence after each sentence speak for itself. Their attorney tried to rattle me during cross-examination. "Isn't it true you're emotionally dependent on your grandmother?" "No," I said. "I'm emotionally safe with her. That's not dependence. That's what love is supposed to look like." He tried again. "Would you say you benefited financially from your grandmother's gift?" "Eventually, yes," I said, "but not nearly as much as my parents have, over 2 decades of expenses, vacations, and unchecked control." There was a moment, just a flicker, where my father looked away. It was small, but I saw it. After the final statements, the judge folded her hands. Her voice was clear, unshaken. "This case," she said, "is not about love or disappointment or the fractures inside this family. It is about ownership, legality, and intent." She paused. "I see no evidence of coercion or cognitive decline. What I do see is a long-standing pattern of entitlement disguised as family obligation." She turned to my parents. "This is nothing but greed wrapped in legal clothing." My mother gasped. My father's lips thinned. "I am dismissing this claim with prejudice," the judge concluded. "And if another baseless motion is filed, sanctions will be considered." Gavel, one sharp crack, case closed. Outside the courtroom, I felt my legs go weak. Grandma reached for my arm and we walked together through the marble halls like survivors of a storm. No cheering, no dramatic outburst. Just peace. Relief, soft and quiet like spring rain. We stepped out into the Kansas sunlight. And for the first time in a long, long time, I felt free. For a moment, I believed the worst was over. I believed that the courtroom had settled something final, that truth had drawn a boundary my parents would finally respect. That maybe, even if we were never a family again, we could all go our separate ways in silence. But I should have known better, because peace is not a language my parents speak. The second summons came in a thin white envelope, dropped through the mail slot of my apartment like a ghost. I opened it standing in the doorway, grocery bag still on my wrist. At first, the words didn't make sense. Then they did. Petition for alimony and financial restitution. Claimants, Gerald and Janice Elwood. Defendant, April Elwood, me. They were suing me, not Grandma, me. The room tilted. I sat down on the couch, letter trembling in my hands. They were claiming I'd robbed them of their retirement, that I had extracted undue financial benefit from my upbringing and now owed them compensation, like I was a parasite, a con artist. Like every unpaid shift in the bakery, every carpool run, every babysitting night so Brielle could go out, none of it had ever happened. They were rewriting my life again. And this time, they were putting a price tag on it. The sob hit me like a wave. I couldn't hold it back. I stumbled to Grandma's kitchen, letter still crumpled in my fist, and collapsed at her table, shoulders shaking. She looked up from her paperwork, immediately alert. "April!" I couldn't answer. Just handed her the summons with both hands. She read in silence. Her jaw didn't move, but her eyes hardened. "They're really doing this," I whispered. "They're really saying I owe them for being their daughter." I wasn't even crying anymore. I was shaking, laughing, something. "I just wanted to live," I choked out. "I didn't want a war, I didn't want revenge, I just wanted to be left alone." She folded the letter neatly, set it on the table like a chess piece. "They've declared war," she said calmly. "So we fight again." I looked at her, stunned. "I don't have the energy, I don't have the money." "Then we'll use mine," she said without hesitation. "And every legal clause, every receipt, every labor record, we will bury this nonsense in truth." "But I don't want to become like them," I whispered. "Always fighting, always proving." She reached across the table, held my hand tight. "This isn't about revenge, April, it's about reclamation. You're not fighting for what's theirs, you're defending what's yours, your peace, your future." I nodded slowly, because she was right. But deep down, I knew something else too, something I hadn't said aloud yet. This wasn't about money to them. This was about punishment. They had lost control. They had lost the narrative. And now they were coming after me with the only language they knew, power and shame. They wanted to drag me through the mud, not to win, but to make sure I never stood tall again. And I had to decide, would I let them? That night I couldn't sleep. I sat on the floor of my apartment, surrounded by old boxes and bakery notes and receipts from years of unpaid work. I spread it all out like armor. My phone buzzed. A message from Grandma. "We begin in the morning. Be ready. We're going to dismantle their story piece by piece." I stared at those words. And for the first time since the summons arrived, I felt my strength return. Not because I wasn't scared, but because I finally understood something. They'd never truly seen me as their daughter. But that didn't mean I wasn't worthy. It meant they were wrong. And now I'd prove it. The courtroom was different this time. Not colder, just heavier. Like the walls themselves understood the weight of what was about to happen. This wasn't just a lawsuit. It was a reckoning. They sat across from me, smug and poised like they were doing society a favor. My father with that controlled fury in his eyes, my mother feigning wounded grace, and Brielle in the second row flipping through her phone like this was jury duty. They were suing me for alimony. They claimed I'd profited unfairly from their sacrifices. They wanted a portion of the bakery's current profits, even though they hadn't stepped foot inside it in years. Even though I had rebuilt it with Grandma from the ground up, while they lounged on yachts and bought new kitchen tile. But today, we were done with performances. My attorney stood first, calm and measured. He introduced a box of evidence we'd spent weeks compiling. Every unpaid hour I logged at the bakery since age 15. Every summer I worked while they vacationed. Emails, calendar logs, employee testimonials, even old social media posts of my parents on vacation. Timestamped to dates I was holding down the ovens alone. The judge skimmed the files, her face unreadable. Then my attorney called the first witness. Sarah Mitchell, one of our bakery's longtime managers. "I remember April baking every Saturday at 16, she said clearly. Her parents would swing by sometimes, but never stayed long. April ran the register, ordered inventory, coordinated deliveries. Most of the real work was on her shoulders. Did she receive wages for that work?" the judge asked. "Not that I ever saw," Sarah replied. "They said she was part of the family business. I guess they thought love paid the rent." A ripple of quiet chuckles passed through the courtroom. The second witness was the bakery's accountant from years ago. He testified that all profits were funneled into personal accounts, none of which had my name on them. And finally, Grandma took the stand. She was calm, radiant, that blue suit again like armor. "My son and daughter-in-law did not build the bakery," she said flatly. "They inherited my work, used my earnings, and when the business became profitable, they removed themselves entirely." She looked directly at the judge. "April did more for the bakery by age 20 than either of them did in 2 decades. The judge turned to my parents. "Do you have any documented financial support provided to your daughter as an adult? Rent, tuition, health care?" My mother opened her mouth, then closed it. My father looked to their attorney. He shifted uncomfortably. "No," Dad muttered. "And is it true," the judge continued, "that you relinquished all official involvement with the bakery nearly 8 years ago?" "Yes," he snapped. The judge leaned forward. "Then explain why you believe you're owed compensation from a business you haven't contributed to, from a daughter you didn't pay, and from a life you chose to abandon." They didn't answer. They couldn't, because this wasn't about fairness. It was about punishment, about control, and they had lost it. The judge looked at me, her eyes softening just slightly. "You've proven not just financial independence," she said, "but exploitation." She lifted her gavel. "This case is closed and shameful." The sound of that gavel cracking against the block sent a jolt through my chest. It was over. Really, truly over. Outside the courthouse, Grandma pulled me into a hug so tight it knocked the breath out of me. "You did it," she whispered. "No," I said, clutching her back. "We did." A week later, we met again at the family home. Only this time, it wasn't their house anymore. Grandma handed me the final documents. It was official now. I was the sole owner of the home where I'd once been treated like an outsider. I stepped through the front door slowly, my footsteps echoing against the floorboards that had once heard only silence and fear from me. Now they heard something else. Victory. Not loud, not boastful. Just quiet, solid, undeniable. I walked each room alone, not to relive the past, but to reclaim it, one step at a time. The first thing I did was repaint the kitchen, not because it needed it, but because I needed it. For years, that kitchen was where my mother's sharp voice rang through the air like broken glass, where my father's silence drowned out apology, where I learned how to make toast for myself at 8 because no one remembered it was my turn for breakfast. So I painted it. Sunflower yellow. Grandma said it was obnoxiously cheerful. I told her that was exactly the point. Bit by bit, I filled the house with pieces of my own life. Warm candles, mismatched mugs, bakery blueprints framed like art, and soft music playing from a speaker that didn't belong to anyone but me. No more walking on eggshells. No more holding my breath in my own home. It was mine now, not just on paper, but in spirit. And that called for celebration. I hosted the first party I'd ever planned just for joy. No birthday, no holiday. Just a gathering of people who had stood beside me through fire and fear. Bakery staff, neighbors. Even my old college roommate drove in from Wichita. We filled the backyard with folding tables, string lights, and laughter that didn't sound forced or filtered. Grandma stood beside the grill with a spatula and a plastic tiara someone had forced on her. I watched her laugh so hard she cried when someone called her the matriarch of Mercy Street. Inside, people wandered the house like it was a museum of reclaimed joy. They complimented the new paint, the herb garden in the kitchen, the framed newspaper article about the bakery's expansion. But what they didn't know was this. Every time someone smiled in this house, it healed something. Every kind word, every moment of warmth, every time someone laughed without fear, it rewrote the walls. And somewhere across town, I knew my parents were watching. The house they used to call theirs now pulsed with the life they never cultivated. The bakery they'd abandoned was now expanding under my leadership. The daughter they dismissed had become the woman they never expected. I didn't hate them. Not anymore. I didn't wish them harm. But I wouldn't waste a single second mourning their absence, either. As the sun set and the lights above the yard twinkled to life, I raised a glass of sparkling cider and called for everyone's attention. "This home," I said, voice steady, "was built with love and sweat, and from now on, never again with silence." The crowd clapped. Grandma wiped her cheek discreetly, and someone in the back yelled, "To April!" They toasted. And for the first time in my life, I felt what family was supposed to be, not inherited. Chosen. The house was still. Sunlight stretched across the hardwood floors like memory. The bakery apron hung on its usual hook, untouched since the last big order. My hands trembled slightly as I adjusted the vase of fresh tulips on the dining table, Grandma's favorite. She was gone, peacefully, in her sleep, just like she'd always said she wanted. She'd passed 2 weeks ago with her hand in mine and a whisper on her lips. You know what to do now. Today, I would learn exactly what she meant. The family gathered at the lawyer's office for the will reading. I sat near the window, my back straight, my hands folded. I had learned over the years that posture was sometimes armor. My parents arrived together, both in stiff black. Brielle wore oversized sunglasses and didn't look up once. They took their seats like mourners at a performance. But they weren't mourning Dottie. They were mourning the control they'd lost. The lawyer opened the envelope with careful fingers. He didn't look at anyone in particular as he began to read. To my granddaughter, April, who stood with me when no one else did, my breath caught. I leave full ownership of all bakery properties, trademarks, and associated accounts. You built this legacy beside me, and now it is yours. I swallowed hard. Across the room, my father flinched. The lawyer continued. To my son Gerald and daughter-in-law Janice, he paused. They receive nothing. My mother gasped audibly. Brielle's glasses slipped slightly, revealing eyes that were wide with shock. Let it be known, the lawyer said, now meeting my parents' gaze, that this decision is not made in anger but in clarity. You had decades to show love through action. You chose absence, entitlement, and cruelty. I leave you with your choices, nothing more. The room was quiet. Utterly, perfectly quiet. I didn't smile. I didn't gloat. I simply breathed. As we filed out, my mother brushed past me, her lips pressed so tightly they looked bloodless. My father didn't speak, just stared at the floor. Brielle lingered near the door. She looked at me, not angry, not smug, just small. I didn't think she'd really do it, she whispered. I did, I said. She always meant what she said. She left you everything. No, I said softly. She left me what I earned. That afternoon, I returned to the house alone. I unlocked the front door like I always did now, with steady hands, with a clear conscience. I walked through each room slowly, not as a grieving granddaughter, not even as the new owner, but as the woman she raised me to be, strong, unshaken, free. In the living room, I lit a candle beside her photo. The bakery keys sat on the mantel. I picked them up, felt their weight settle in my palm. I've got it from here, I whispered. Outside, the trees swayed gently in the autumn wind. Inside, the air was still, but never silent. Because in this house, in this life, silence had been replaced with something louder than memory. Legacy.